In 1977, Dario Argento etched himself into the broken minds of horror film fanatics forever, creating his colourful and atmospheric masterpiece, Suspiria. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, as I have stated in previous podcast episodes in this series, this is not my personal favourite of Argento's films, but I think it's very important to acknowledge that it is his most, I think quite comfortably, his most iconic film. For people who know a little bit about film history or horror film history but aren't overly familiar with Italian stuff, it's pretty inevitable that they still will have heard of Suspiria if they have heard of one Italian horror film, and that is generally how they will associate Argento in their minds. And I think what's interesting about that is it provides a large amount of the reason, in my opinion, for why Argento has this reputation that's so definitively in the ballpark of his stories and character and character development are largely irrelevant, whilst his style and color is his strength. Now, if you were going based purely off this film, that would be fair enough. I think that the premise, the actual premise of this film is arguably a little lame. It's, this dance school that is run by a coven of witches. I think as well that, as you will have picked up from my previous episode, I feel like the character development and interaction in Deep Red is unbelievable and really well put together, and arguably is the driving force of that film. Whereas this film, most of the characters aren't particularly likable. I think Susie is fairly likable, but yeah, no one else do we particularly want to be around that much. But this is the first film where I think that Argento's strength sort of helps him not worry so much about what's actually going on. And also, his atmosphere and his style, I think up to this point walked really hand in hand with his actual plots, whereas in this one, I think to an extent he's just genuinely not too worried about the plot at all. This certainly isn't a criticism. It's probably a criticism that could be laid against some of his later films, but the bottom line is with this film is, as long as you've watched it on the biggest screen possible with the loudest audio possible, then you haven't been disappointed, I would imagine. So it did take me a while as a fan of Argento to actually really fully appreciate this film. I think I always understood the substance and the style of it, but there was something about it that that didn't necessarily sit right with me in terms of calling it a classic. But I think over the years, the more that I've watched it, the more that I understand the brilliant, intricate way that the score is often weaved into the atmosphere of the film, and there's just some unbelievable individual scenes in this film. One in particular that I'll get to, that I feel like you just don't see in other films. So this is quite genuinely fantastic. So getting into the specifics of the film now, and once again I'll analyse Argento's sort of opening credits, or very much the opening scenes. I love this thing that he continues to do, where he meshes different pieces of music just in the opening credits. So on this occasion, he doesn't tell us anything about what's actually going on, but it does use two of the different scores that within the opening credits. the bass one, or at least part of the score that is the more built-in sort of softer one, and also it has a more aggressive version, a more angry, faster one that provides a lot of atmosphere right from the start. What I then love about the opening scene itself is the way Argento is able to create sort of horror out of absolutely nothing in this film. So Susie arrives at the airport in Freiburg, Germany, I believe, is where this film is set, and it's like right off the bat, she's just walking through the corridor at the airport, and the way he contrasts that music when she's walking towards the outside, and we're seeing the sliding doors, and it's very rainy outside. When we see it from her perspective, the music is building, and then it goes silent when we can just see Susie's face, and it just creates this unease right from the start of the film. Then the way they shoot the actual sliding doors opening and closing, it sort of feels that like they're sort of blades. It just feels like everything is dangerous, and all they've actually done, anything that is literally uncomfortable at this point, is the fact that it's raining, right? Even the rain seems swirly and aggressive. So she goes outside, and after some fair amount of effort, she eventually manages, basically by running in front and forcing him to stop, manages to find herself a taxi, and the driver is not exactly hostile but a little bit rude, and he's not very clear about where she says she wants to go. It's rather humorous, because it sounds pretty clear to me what she says, and then he makes her repeat it a couple of times, and then she gives him a card or something that has the name of it, and he reads like, and then what he repeats basically is the same thing that she said. But anyway, as this ride, this taxi ride goes on, we see just the wonderful colouring of this film, right? It's going across her face. It almost looks like some kind of disco going on in the car, and it's really in aid of nothing, right? It's just atmosphere for the sake of atmosphere, and in many ways, I think that's what this film is. As I said, I think plot stuff really was really forgotten about largely in this film, and still a mystery does drive it, but not in the way I think that we've seen in previous Argento films. So throughout this taxi ride, they have some different shots. There's those shots that they use of that sort of forest, that tree area. The music's continuing to build. It's so dark. It's so rainy, and so within a couple of minutes in this film, we've seen a main character get in a taxi and drive around a little bit, and it's already like, what the hell is going on, right? It's so effective, right? It's so incredibly effective, and it really is an unbelievable start to the film. So soon enough, we get to the opening Argento plot device, and one of the methods that he seems to use in these early things that are happening in scenes, I mean, he does it from time to time throughout his films, is while the crucial thing or piece of information is happening, he'll just the camera will be left somewhere in a way that it wouldn't usually be in a film where something important is happening. And it creates these odd sort of situations, like the camera sort of, when Susie gets out of the taxi, it's being shot as if the only relevant thing is Susie, while this Pat Hingle, I believe her name is sort of muttering inaudible things from the door. Immediately, one thing that jumps out at me about this scene is like, and it's largely just because of the way the film has been shot so far, is everything is terrifying, and the place that she's going to spend most of the film is also terrifying. There's something very clear about that building that you don't want to go into. I think the way they shoot it, the usual angle that they have of the front of the building, is really, really, really unbelievably. It's just intimidating, and there's something slightly off about it. So, she runs off, sort of with arms flying around all over the place, and she's in a bit of a panic. And then Susie tries to get in, but what turns out to be Sarah is not letting her in because she doesn't know who she is. And at some point, we see Pat running through the forest with the crazy music, the more aggressive drums and the stuff that's going on. That's very, it's like it's insane inducing, right? Or insanity inducing. So I think eventually Susie has to get back in the car, which is fine. And then we see Pat arrive at her friend's apartment. I think it's a big apartment, or an apartment building, and her friend has an apartment there. This place is the most Argento-looking film set you could ever imagine. It is so bizarre. It's very, very arty and stuff. It's very bright, but everything looks like it wants to kill you. Like I'm sure you can all picture the shot in that, I guess, main foyer area where you see this big open room, and at the far end of the shot is this sort of staircase that sort of leads in two different diagonal directions, and it just looks like just the design of it is like, what the hell is this place? Like, something is gonna go down here. And I think the best thing about it is Argento, quite clearly, after a crazy start to the film in terms of atmosphere, he really, really wanted to reward us, right? With this sort of crescendo of the opening sequence and part of the film. And he wanted to do this in the most, I guess, insane visual setting that he possibly could. So there's some sort of lame dialogue. Again, I'm not overly critical of this, but some of the dubbing in this film really doesn't lend itself to the most effective shots. But again, none of this stuff really matters. So she talks to her friend, and she says that something's going on, and it's too strange to sort of describe. Then, again, the music and the atmosphere builds. So they have that wonderful shot of Pat inside the room, and it's the shot is from outside the building, and it's sort of it's building energy, and something is up. So Pat sort of looks out the window, and then an arm smashes through. That is sort of a bit lame. But then this is one of the things that I think I've referred to a couple of times with Argento, especially in these two mid to late Argento films, is the music cue sort of the music seems to define the way that we feel, and it isn't necessarily affected exactly by what's going on. More like the overall thing that's going on is the story, and the music will just take it wherever. So the music does sort of explode when the hand comes through the window, but after that, it's very much like the music is sort of a little bit unrelated to what's going on, and that becomes truer, I think, for the dog eating blind man scene later on in the film. This is one of the most violent. This is one of maybe the most violent thing that appears in an Argento film. There's multiple stabbings of this lady, Pat, and look, I think we can acknowledge the part where her heart is directly stabbed into is maybe a little bit too far. It probably looks a bit silly, but then that scene where her head sort of goes through the ceiling on the glass. The glass on the ceiling, and you can see it popping through where her friend at the bottom can see. That shot of her falling down and then getting hung, that whole sequence is just sensational. In this vibrant, massive foyer type area in this building, the paint looking blood running down her legs, the revelation that the friend has been impaled and there's glass through her face and she's dead as well. It's like this scene thrives on its own spectacle, right? Like, it's making absolutely no apologies about what's happening here. And by this point, if you're not liking it, then you know you're not going to like the film, because this is the type of film that it is. So eventually things have to calm down, right? And I think continuing, or maybe even extending on that theme that I talked about at length in episode 4 of that sort of masculinity position. And as I also teased, I will before my next episode of this show next week, I will have my essay up on my Italian Horror Guy website blog thing. I think from memory, I do talk a lot about this theme in that essay, but there's a real sort of disempowerment of men in Deep Red, and then in this film, men are they're actually sort of subordinate characters. So after what we've just seen, and that whole opening sequence, we then immediately cut to the most mundane sort of possible shot. It's very nice and sunny, and I think you can hear birds chirping, and an unknown character with a dog, a blind man with a dog and a cane. He is just walking, towards the school, but part of the sort of trick of all this is what this film is, right? Men are subordinates. He's got a role where he's largely abused at the school. Does Daniel the blind man? He can't see, I think. So Susie enters the building soon and has these conversations with all the witches, basically. There's Madame Blanc and Miss Tanner, I believe her name is, that very harsh-looking, aggressive lady. And then I think she's sort of talking to to Miss Tanner, and she explains, I think it's Pavlos, and I think she says you can... just ask Pavlos if you need anything. He is very ugly, but he's very helpful, or something like that. And it's just like, and I'm not even sure he speaks. And then she sort of praises him for his bizarre teeth that he has. it's a very humorous thing. So they use this next portion of the film where, you know, we have all that excitement, and then obviously it has to calm down and give us a bit of context and stuff, but they seem to use this part of the film to then establish the sort of atmosphere of, or even the world that Susie's going to be in, right, where men are they barely have a voice, they barely have sight in some cases, and Susie is clearly just lovely and just wants to get by, but there's a bit of tenseness about everything that's going on, right? Like right through the film until the end, Madame Blanc is so excessively. She's like a sort of quintessential, you know, kind of film school. Sorry, not film school. Dance school. You know, flouncy sort of character in the way that she speaks, but it's sickening. There's too much of it, right? So she's very false. And then there's Miss Tanner, who's a real contrast to her, that is, you know, a bit hard and bitchy. So speaking of bitchy, then, you know, Susie has to meet all her classmates, I suppose, if you'd call them that, and like the whole thing's just very uncomfortable. There's that rather lame moment where I think it's Olga with Sarah and Susie comes up and says, I heard that women or girls whose names start with S are snakes, and it's this really lame stuff, as if the film is basically, you know, doing its absolute best to make sure you know that we don't really care so much. We don't really care so much about the plot of this film, and, you know, I guess, you know, I don't mind. It is rather humorous though. So there's a little bit of that goes on, and then just to establish, I think, a degree of discomfort, and I think maybe on the way to like a dance lesson, again for the atmosphere, right? She's wandering through that corridor, and that sort of butch older lady who is always with that boy. This woman reminds me of Miss Trunchbull from from Matilda. Anyway, and the boy is played by the same actor who is in Deep Red, who plays that young Carlo. But I think she's sitting there with a knife or some kind of blade thing, and she, like, just for the purpose of nothing, just sort of shines it in Susie's eyes, and obviously it's some kind of witchcraft because he immediately after that gets sick. And I think, aside from it just being a really, really cool shot, I think what I really like about this scene is like the film's not going to let you off. You know, it's a different. Maybe it's a slightly different tone to what we've seen. Like the atmosphere and colour and music of the film up to this point has almost been, so it's been aggressively atmospheric, right? But even while the film is sort of getting into itself, and we're putting a bit of plot type stuff in there, the terror and the horror is a little bit more subtle at this point, right? So that happens, and then she goes to class, and she suddenly is very, very sick and very lightheaded and unable to actually do anything. And you know, Miss Tanner really pushes her to dance, even though she's clearly not ready to. And eventually she finds herself in some kind of hospital-like bed, or I think she's still within the confines of the school, and you know, all the lovely witches are there, sort of fussing on her and making sure she's okay, even though they obviously don't give a shit. But I think within this scene, I sort of like the way, like, so while she's in the hospital bed, I just like the way it's shot. Everything's just about 20% closer to her than it should be. I think it makes everything feel very confined, right? Like, she probably doesn't particularly want all these people in the room fussing over her, and it's like it's just the ability of Argento to, continually make things uncomfortable, I think. And so in an atmospheric sense, in a sort of cinematography sense, everything is uncomfortable, and then even a story sense. So we're now worried about her. We're worried that she's sick. We're worried that at any time someone can attack her. And also Olga, apparently immediately sort of removes her from her room once she realizes that she's sick. And so there's also that sense that no one really likes her, right? Within all of this, it's sort of, maybe it's a slight flaw of the film. There is no point, basically, that you can like sort of think about Susie's situation and think that she genuinely is happy to be doing what she's doing, right? She is there to learn how to dance or become a great dancer, and there's never ever a moment in this film where you can actually reflect on that. There's a couple of scenes of actual dancing, but both of them don't serve the purpose of barely even trying to pretend this film is about that, right? Like in one she collapses, and then in another one Daniel gets fired, and they're nothing to do with the actual dancing stuff. So that's a sort of interesting thing. Then to continue this, what would you say, constant tone of discomfort, we see I guess you'd almost call it the maggots raining scene. So there is no situation, right, where maggots aren't a great way of making a movie more uncomfortable. So I think maggots start raining down on Susie, I think, and then there's that sort of almost, what would you call, like panicky music, as all the ladies are running around with maggots in their hair, and they're all screaming, and it's all very uncomfortable until we find I don't know, the box of rotting food or something, but it's just all about everything is atmospheric. Sometimes it feels like in this film, like the music can kill you. The characters are usually rather hostile, with the exception of Sarah. There are disgusting things going on. It's like there's nowhere to be safe in this film, because everywhere outside of the school up to this point that we've been introduced to is terrifying, really. The airport, the outside of the airport, the way to it, the outside of it, but then inside everything's terrifying as well. There's only really one scene outside of it that that actually makes it okay. So it's this sort of claustrophobic sense of there's nowhere to go, right? There's nowhere to hide. And also I think the sort of supernatural element of it all makes it feel like you can't escape that either. Like Pat at the start had attempted to escape it, and she initially felt like she was safe because she'd got out of the place where all the danger emanates from. But the danger can follow, right? The danger's like an ever-present thing, and yeah, it just makes for a sort of wonderfully, what would you say? A wonderfully sort of fearful scene, a film that just doesn't really let you off psychologically. any point. So I feel like this is sort of the point of the part of the film where we've now been given some information. We've been given all of this atmosphere and fear in general. This is now the part of the film where I think we now go into full on investigation mode. Right. This is previously sort of Argento's strength. So they all have their little sort of sleepover. It almost reminds me of like when you're a kid, and for some reason you have a sleepover at your school overnight in like a big like hallway or a big like hall. So they're all sort of they're all. I think everyone in the school is like having a little bit of a sleepover in some big open room, and Sarah's going on about the the directress and her snoring for a while, which is like, okay, we sort of haven't been introduced to the idea of a directress as fearful or something until this moment, but nonetheless, it does just give that sense of the unnatural, right? Because like the snoring is weird, but it's not as weird as Sarah makes it sound. But obviously, it's sort of relevant because we want to explain and to make sure that there is something very unnatural going on. So after this scene, and this leads up to what is frankly one of the greatest scenes of atmospheric horror that's probably ever been put to screen. So the next day, everything is fine, seemingly. That bloody Trunchbull woman with the little kid walk up to Daniel's dog outside, and the kid's sort of staring at him in that way that he does. And then soon after, Miss Tanner comes bursting into the room and yelling at Daniel because the dogs attacked the little boy. And this scene's genuinely uncomfortable. I think, like, she's screaming at him, and you really feel sorry for Daniel. And she grabs she says, "Oh, you're never coming back." But I think this is the key in this scene, and it's sort of explained later by that old professor guy, that they really don't like being crossed. My impression is that she had no intention. She didn't intend definitely to fire Daniel when she came bursting into the room, but I feel like when he screams back at her, "You bitch," and it's worth mentioning that's a very gendered sort of insult. That's too much, right? The men are the subordinates in this film. He's just the blind man who comes in and plays piano for us. You do not challenge me. And I think we feel quite confident in the idea that the dog didn't actually attack him, right? That they've decided that they're just going to stitch Daniel up for no reason. They're just sort of bullying him for the sake of it. So it's uncomfortable the way she kicks him out. And then, it's sort of humorous the way he wanders off and he seems very, very free. When it cuts back to him slightly later, he's at that little show with the dancing German guys. The scene makes no bones about the fact that Daniel's going to die, but the whole thing is just fucking sensational. Again, so I was making this point earlier about the music and the scene and the cinematography. they work together so that this whole thing is terrifying. It's not, although it is suspenseful, it's not necessarily about the suspense or the payoff. It's about the entire process. So first, it's probably worth mentioning, and I reckon this happens in some sort of late 80s Italian horror films. It never looks good when an animal is attacking a person in a horror film. Before CGI was better, because basically it's just a puppet, and it's quite clear it's a puppet, right? So they and that's clearly what attacks him. So partly what's good about this scene is the fact that it doesn't make that the focus. But so as he's walking through the city, the music, it's the early part of that long, unbelievable theme that they have. And it builds up slowly until he's in this very big open courtyard area with some old buildings. It's to be honest, it's got very Hitlerian vibes, this place. If you can think of any sort of like rally, it's a type of place that it looks like a rally would have taken place, or like I don't know, whatever you'd call. Yeah, I guess a rally. And he sort of wanders into this area, and he stops. The dog starts barking. He slowly becomes more and more aware that something's happening, right? The birds start flying around. The music gets more and more intense, and he starts getting very nervous, like, who's there? Who's there? He starts yelling, what is it? And eventually, like, we see this sort of figure on top of one of the buildings. It's like a statue of some kind of bird, and then we hear sort of flapping, and we have like a point of view shot that sort of flies towards him. It gives the impression that like this force has made that bird animate or something. I don't think that's what is actually the case, but again, with Argento's sort of ambiguous POV shots, it's never exactly clear what's going on, and I think that's the genius. And the music, I think the music really kicks in once once that moment happens, and then the music's doing the it's sort of banging away. Daniel's screaming, Daniel's terrified. The dog's just there by his side, and it gets more and more intense. The music's so loud, and then to the point that when the dog actually attacks him, it's almost something of a banality, right? It's almost like he's been killed by the music already. Like, he's not escaping this situation. And the music doesn't, I think, really shift when the dog attacks him. It just continues. So it makes the whole thing a process, right? It's not so much about the what is going to happen to him, or is he going to survive? Like, he's already dead. There's no way he's surviving this. So it attacks him, and some of the attack shots aren't great because they're very puppet-like. I think it becomes more and more effective once it really gets into his neck, and it's quite disgusting. But the music just continues apace the whole time, even while those sort of police type figures, I suppose, notice and run over. And the whole thing really, really is just... It's just sensational. I've probably said as much about it as I really need to, but my God, what an absolutely fantastic scene, right? I suspect the opening sequence with Pat getting hung and stuff is probably the scene people most immediately, remember about this film. But to be perfectly honest, I think this is the one. I think this is the moment, right? You want to watch this scene in a dark room on a massive screen with the highest possible volume, and it really is a mind-blowing, sort of mind-boggling scene, right? So then the film has to calm down again a little bit. We find that we find out that from Sarah that she was the one who was on the telecom at the start of the movie, which, you know, makes sense, because, to be honest, even I think the first time I'd ever seen it, I'd sort of picked that up, because, you know, there's only so many different voice actors that are playing it, so, you know, and she has her very specific voice. Now we do kick into overdrive a little bit with the investigative stuff, which makes it feel more like a giallo, and I guess it is still technically a giallo. It's got many of the aspects of a giallo, but it's got, you know, it's a different type to the others, obviously. Sarah gives there is a few scenes of sort of discussion with Sarah and Susie, and Sarah's sort of feeding some information to her. I think, to be honest, actually, this is probably one of the parts of the film that does sort of let down a little bit. That so much of so much of the development of the plot is just done through dialogue. I think that there's a bit of showing, like the showing that happens in this film are the spectacles and the murders. The telling is just giving us basic plot stuff, right? So Sarah gives us some information, but nonetheless, then we soon have her lengthy stalking scene, right? So Sarah and Susie have managed to work out that the witches don't actually leave the school at 9:30 on Friday or whatever it is, because they listen to the footsteps. And I guess there's a sense that the witches have worked out that Sarah's sort of onto them about something. This whole sequence of Sarah dying is, you know, I think it's damn cool. So I love that. I love the whole framing of that room that she ends up locking herself in with, and then there's some rather humorous situation with. It reminds me a little bit of The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, where Julia is sort of stuck in the house, and the knife's sort of slowly gone through the door and just sort of poking through. In this, it's like there's this tiny little knife that's trying for seemingly ages to lift the door handle, like the lock and stuff, but just doesn't seem like they know they're going to open it. So then this goes on for a while, and eventually, you know, Sarah stacks up some suitcases that are just there conveniently to go into this tiny little window at the top of the room. And I've always felt that the look of that window is slightly sinister. It's so high up, but it's big enough for her to crawl through. And, you know, I think often in these movies when the music disappears that you know something's bad. So the music's long since stopped when she climbs through the window, and we get a shot from inside the next room there once she climbs through. Now, I think I have to make note of the fact that the way the scene is framed, we can't see that ridiculous wiring on the floor, but Sarah would be able to from where she is. She sort of sees a door on the other side of the room, and then just decides to leap from the position that she's in onto the floor without looking at all. But in the process of her climbing through, surely she would have seen it at the bottom. But nonetheless, she leaps, and then the music goes crazy, and then she struggles around the wiring for ages until eventually, you know, she gets she gets to the other side of the room, and then she gets her throat cut. So, I guess what I'd say there is, within the whole scene, the actual death is probably slightly disappointing, but the whole thing is, again, it's very, very atmospheric, and as silly as it is maybe that she lands in that wiring, it is still pretty cool, isn't it? So that's the end of her, and then they do their sort of clean up job, do the witches, and say, oh well, they tell Susie, oh well, she's just, she's gone, she just fled, just gone, and it's sort of like we can tell that Susie obviously isn't convinced, but this is sort of the method that everyone's sort of buzzing around, the day after Daniel dies or the day after Pat dies, and like, oh, this is terrible, huh? But it's like you don't I guess really get the impression that they actually do think it's it's that big a deal, and we sort of, as I say, we sort of know the whole time that obviously they're involved in this in some way. So Susie then goes and has a discussion with a couple of and this is like the sort of giving us some information part of the film. He has a discussion with a psychiatrist, and this is actually a really interesting thing, I think, because this scene, I think, explains the Argento film philosophy at the time. Even though this particular film, like the events of this film, don't really align with it. Although, as a psychological film, it sort of makes sense. So she has a chat to this younger guy about, as in younger than the next guy she talks to, about the occult and stuff, I think, and he's not really having it. He seems to like her, but and get along with her, but he's just not really interested. And she seems to, well, she's sort of getting at there's something odd going on, and then there's the classic line from him: "Bad luck isn't brought by broken mirrors, but broken minds." It's an absolutely beautiful line, right? It's so quotable, and what I particularly like about it is that the image of broken mirrors is very Argento in a literal sense, like glass and windows and ceilings and all kinds of stuff. But I guess, this film is literally about like occult stuff and witches and all that kind of thing. But it's almost a revelation, not necessarily the philosophy of this film, but perhaps that as well, that so much that's going on with it is psychological, and that most of his killers have extreme psychological problems, right? I think that's one of the really interesting things about it. But again, with this film, they don't. They're just awful witches, right? But I guess it's just so interesting that Argento chose one of the best lines in his films to sort of appear in this one, when it doesn't necessarily fit. But nonetheless, I find this whole scene pretty cool. But then when she talks to the older professor, I think there's just a bit too much on the nose information, and I really don't like the dubbed voice that he gets. It doesn't really fit with his face that much, I don't think. But he just gives her some very direct information and sort of explains about Helena Marcos and her, as she was feared back in the early 1900s or whatever, I think, or maybe the 1800s, and how she died and blah blah blah. But I guess this sort of gets to the heart of what this film is in terms of, you know, the intent or the atmosphere. It really isn't about good plot. He's basically saying that witches are bad and that their aim is to, you know, benefit themselves and to sort of accrue wealth. And really, as I said earlier, sort of everything that's going on in this film, there is no attempt at any point to sort of... This isn't like a whodunit exactly, is it? Like, right from the start when Pat gets killed, it's like this figure that comes in through the window that couldn't possibly be there because she's up in the air. So it is a fantastical sort of plot. And on top of that, right from the introduction to basically all the people in the dance school, it's pretty clear, or it seems pretty clear, that the older ladies are all sort of full of shit and pretending like they don't know what's going on, and they're all bitches in their own way. And the Pavlos, he looks like a friggin' vampire, right? So we feel like he's in on it. And then there's the woman, the Trunchbull woman, and the kid, and then all those characters, it turns out, are all evil in the end, right? So it's not exactly hiding the ball. So she now goes back to the school armed with a little bit of information, and this is also in a sense like there's a bit of a redundancy about everything that sort of goes in to the conclusion and stuff, because as I said as I said earlier, like this sense of atmosphere for atmosphere's sake, the actual whole vibe of this closing sequence to the film is fantastic. But this whole, Pat, I uncovered the secret. We've uncovered the secret. It's not in aid of anything, because once the secret is uncovered, then she just sort of has to kill Helena. It's like she doesn't actually have to uncover the secret to survive. She just has to leave, right? Just get out of there. But I guess within it, the old professor did sort of explain that you have to, you know, killing the head of the coven is like cutting off the head of a snake or something, and makes the coven completely useless. So she goes back to the school, and she finally realizes what it is that Pat was saying. She was talking about irises and turning the blue one. You know, it's not necessarily the best of these little, the use of these little devices that Argento had, where he would do this, right? Like, oh yeah, the iris, okay. So she turns the iris, and then she wanders through to, you know, another part of the school, and, you know, it's got to be said that this is a really, really cool just looking area, right? The lighting in this sort of windy corridor is, it's just damn atmospheric, right? Like, if you were walking through there in real life, like what the hell? Where am I? You know, this is scary stuff. So she comes across the coven, sort of yelling about Susie, and then there's this sort of weird spell, like witch spell scene. She's like, give me power, dash, and then sort of Susie starts, she initially sort of feels a bit sick, but it sort of undermines the sense of power that these witches have, because like they're literally saying death, but Susie sort of has a slight reaction, but then she seems to seems to just sort of get over it quite quickly. She ends up. Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought a little bit here. Right. So she ends up hiding in a room which turns out to be Helena Marcos's room, and there are a couple of elements of this scene that are a little bit unsatisfying, for two different reasons. Although, to be clear, I think it is a good scene. It's just not as satisfying as it otherwise could be. So I don't mind the dubbing of Helena Marcos. So she's sitting on her bed, and you can see a shadow through the outside blind thing of the bed, and then she pulls it back and you can't see her. So, you want to kill me? You wanted to kill me? And then there's that sort of energetic laughing that is probably a little bit excessive, but is still, it's fine. And in fact, it's just worth mentioning as well in this scene. There's this bird that looks suspiciously like a bird with the crystal plumage, just next to Susie as she's standing in the room there. Before she sort of notices Helena Marcos, I'll just leave that there. But then Marcos sort of says about now you're going to come face to face with the living dead or whatever. And this is right after Susie has seen Sarah's body. I think it's cool, right? I think that's a really effective shot of horror where we see the very beaten up and dead Sarah coming towards her, because this actually does feel genuinely. She actually does feel like a reanimated corpse. Right, like it's really cool. She's sort of wandering towards her with the Helena Marcos laugh. But the part of it the first part of it that is a little bit unsatisfying is the fact that we've already seen much far superior set pieces of horror in this film than this, and I think this is something that probably was always the case with Argento's films. This isn't necessarily an attack at them, but that the actual build-up, we're not necessarily building up to something better, right? We're not necessarily building up to an unbelievable showdown, but because obviously the main two scenes I'm thinking of are from the death of Pat and her friend in the apartment building, and then the death of Daniel, because these scenes have happened and are so unbelievably framed and shot and they're just unbelievably satisfying, right? Because of that, I don't think that I just don't think that this scene quite does it for us, right? And it isn't particularly satisfying, sort of, I think, how it concludes. So she sees the outline of Helena Marcos, I don't know, because of some kind of lightning or something, and then she just stabs into the nothingness and kills her. And it's sort of a bit like, is that... I guess it's just a bit anticlimactic, right? She stabs through her. It's sort of cool how she stabs seemingly right through the throat or neck of this person, just straight through, this corpse. I think the image of Helena Marcos is pretty cool. Like, it feels like she is actually a corpse. I guess maybe it's in reference to, like, the look of her is in reference to what that professor had said about that she burned to death or something like that. So that's sort of cool. But I guess what I'm getting at with the two issues in this scene are that one of them is cool, but just doesn't feel like a sort of upping of the stakes from what we've seen previously. But the other is just that's not a particularly satisfying way of way of ending it. And I also think, so we really, really like Susie. I think she's a really likable character, but it doesn't really feel like the most sort of I think it's an attempt at character growth, but she's never like unresourceful in the film. She is sort of onto things straight away. I think it's quite clear to her that that all the, you know, the sinister people are indeed sinister, and then she discovers it. And I guess what I'm saying, there's no real sort of, this isn't really a change in the way that the way that she's acted. So it isn't sort of a growth thing at all. But you know, I suppose. I suppose it isn't unsatisfying in the sense that we do get this character that we really like, who does sort of save the day, but she only really saves it for herself. Like, I mean, I suppose she saves it for all her classmates, but we don't really like them. We only really sort of like Sarah, if we even like her. So yeah, it's just a bit whatever, I suppose. And then, you know, she rushes out and everything is on fire, and then the film ends. So I guess to conclude it, what I'd say is that the ending isn't bad, but I think the end of such a film probably requires a little bit of, you know, upping of the stakes. So I think we're happy with Susie, but I don't really think at the end of the film, like, I don't really think too much about, oh, I guess she goes back to America now or whatever. Like it's just, it feels very done, right? So yeah, I've probably finished that on a little bit of a downer, but I have certainly given a hell of a lot of credit to the film. And again, to be clear, I do think it's a sensational film, and it probably is reflective of the point here that this film did establish him as a master of atmosphere, but also established him in the minds of everyone else as someone who's never really great on character stuff. And probably from this point onwards, although to be clear, I do think he has some great films after this moment. I'm a big fan of Tenebrae and Phenomena, probably Opera. Some of his 90s stuff isn't as great, and his 90s and 2000s stuff isn't necessarily great. But, and I do still think I'll be doing episodes on them at some point. But I think after this, he probably, as I've alluded to earlier, I think starts reading his own press a little bit, right? Like, I think Inferno might be his next horror film, and it's just, or film in general. And he sort of moves away from plot logic at the cost of actually making a good film, I think, with Inferno. It's not terrible, but it's a bit, yeah, it's a little bit silly. So nonetheless, concluding thoughts on Suspiria, very, very significant film, but not from the perspective of like influence. The credit that it deserves is that it's just so different to anything else that's ever existed, right? It's atmospheric, it's got some unbelievable horror set pieces, and I think if you're in the right setting, it is genuinely terrifying. So that concludes my analysis my analysis of the first 5 giallo/horror films of Dario Argento's career. I'm sure it won't be too long before I cover another one of his films, but yeah, I'll give a little bit of detail, I guess, about what's going to be happening with this show and me, the Italian horror guy, going forward. So, as I've alluded to, I'm going to attempt to do some kind of weekly essay to go with each film that I do. Hell, at some point I'm going to try to get like special guests on, but I'll see if I can have any luck with that. That'd be really cool if I get some like old actors and stuff from the films, but that's probably being a little bit hopeful at this point. But you know, I've seen a couple of them around the Facebook world, so who knows what I can manage there. I think for the first few weeks of this, I'm going to be looking at films from really, really important directors. So I think I said Black Monday on the previous podcast. The Mario Bava film I'll actually be looking at is Black Sunday, which is a 1960 film. I think it's actually one of the first Italian horror films I ever watched, because I went on a bit of a horror film collection spree when I was sort of in my teens and came across this film. And I think it's arguably one of Mario Bava's most famous films, and he's probably, with the exception of Dario Argento, probably acknowledged as one of the absolute masters of Italian horror. I'll be moving towards like Fulci, I would imagine, very soon in the coming weeks as well. And I think I will do different the Bava films as we go on, but the reason I've chosen Black Sunday is because it's not a giallo, and I think it's pretty well before the giallo era really existed as well. But he did do some gialli that I'm sure I'll be getting to in time. But I'm gonna thoroughly watch the Bava film Black Sunday and really, because I don't know if I've ever watched it more than once from the first time that I saw it. Probably 15 years ago nearly. And I'd like to return to it because if memory serves, it's very much in the horror tradition, right? So I'd certainly love to look at that kind of thing. Other than that, so as I've said, my blog site will be going live very soon. I think that I'm going to be doing the podcasts weekly. I'll be recording them Sunday/Monday, my Australian time, and releasing them on Monday Australian time on a weekly basis. At some point during each week, I'll be doing the blog, maybe leading into like Friday or Saturday or something for the film that I'm going to be talking about. And as I say, it'll depend on how it works, but I don't think the content of my blog is going to be the same as the podcast. As you've probably noticed, I don't write these so much. I have a few dot points that I like to talk about. But obviously, a blog post is going to be slightly more formal. So, I think I'm a decent writer. There will be my lengthy essay going up on the website, as long as I assume it can fit. As I said, it's about 5,000 words about Deep Red and Suspiria. Again, in the coming days, as I get it together, then I'll be putting a post together about Mario Bava's film. But yeah, other than that, this is really exciting, to be honest. I've loved Italian horror films for a long time. I think hopefully I've cultivated my speaking voice and ability to speak in general to the point now that my podcasts are indeed interesting to listen to. But as I say, please do join me in the future. And also, if there's anything that you'd like to chat about, or I don't know, even if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast at some point, get in touch with me at the Italian Horror Guy at gmail.com, because I think as part of like a cult sort of following of a particular film or genre of films, as the case is, it's very exciting, I think, to find people that share similar, views to you and just have similar interests. I'm sure, I hope that a lot of my thoughts are my own and different to what yours are, but also I love listening to interviews and people talk about Italian horror films. I think that they're so interesting, and there are so many different perspectives that you can have. And I would love to chat to some people about their thoughts on the genre as well. So, that concludes my little Argento series. From this point, it's going to be a weekly release, both of the podcast and on my Italian Horror Guy blog. Other than that, please do join me in future and have a look at my blog when it's there. This has been an absolute pleasure doing this series. Thanks very much for joining me, and as I say, continue to listen, to tune in to the Italian Horror Guy podcast.